What would a dog remember about war? The smell of smoke hanging in the desert night, the sharp grit of sand caught in his fur, or perhaps the final breath of a friend buried beneath silence. What if I told you that even after the gunfire faded and flags were folded, one soldier never stopped marching? In a quiet town etched deep into the belly of North Carolina, a place where the air smells like pine and old stories hang beneath porch lights, a dog named Gunner slipped through a loose board in a backyard fence. Every night, same path, same time, without fail. The old German shepherd, peppered with grey around his muzzle, limped along the shoulder of Route 43 under the scattered light of distant porch bulbs. Locals had seen him, tail low, ears alert, crossing the dewy grass of Oak Hill Cemetery, disappearing between rows of worn gravestones. But no one knew why. They just whispered, "There goes the soldier's dog again." Gunner didn't belong to anyone now, not since Sergeant Daniel Rourke's funeral 3 years ago. The two of them had been inseparable in Kandahar province, man and military working dog. Bomb detection unit. They'd walked roads no man dared without Gunner's nose clearing the path. They'd survived 6 years of dust and loss, of screams crackling over comms, of nights spent curled in the chill behind canvas walls, until that one explosion, April 12th, one heartbeat, one silence. Daniel was gone. Gunner was found half buried in rubble, whimpering, and then they sent him home. Now on that same street where American flags flutter from mailboxes before the 4th of July, where church bells chime on Sundays and neighbors wave from pickup trucks, there lives a boy named Eli, 12 years old, baseball cap crooked on his sun-bleached hair. Lives with his grandmother after things came undone last year. Eli's house is 2 blocks from the cemetery. He sees Gunner almost every night through the slats of his bedroom blinds. At first he told his grandma, "Grams, the big dog's back again." She barely looked up from her crochet. "That old mutt? He belongs to no one now, let him be." But Eli started watching the way Gunner waited at the corner by the blinking streetlight like he was giving someone time to catch up, watching how his steps slowed as he passed the veterans section of the graveyard. Sometimes the dog just stood there, staring at a single white stone like he was waiting for it to speak. Days blurred into months. Seasons tilted. Summer turned the grasses golden, cicadas buzzing like distant engines echoing from the past. Somehow Gunner still walked that path, even as his limbs stiffened and winter's breath made him cough in his sleep. Eli had started leaving out a bowl of water behind his shed, where the fence met the alley. Gunner drank it without looking up, then vanished again. The boy never reached out, didn't pet him even once. Something about Gunner's silence made it feel wrong to interrupt, like breaking a soldier's final watch. No one remembered who left the worn American flag bandana tied around Gunner's old collar. Maybe it was a gesture. Maybe someone thought he deserved more than a town's indifference, more than fading footprints and fading memory. The truth? The town had moved on, as towns do, but Gunner hadn't. Every night he returned, and every night Eli watched him go. What breaks a soldier isn't the fire, it's the silence afterward. The silence that stretches across the dinner table or curls up on your living room couch where a laugh used to be. Gunner's days were slow. He dozed under the sun by an abandoned shed near the edge of town, tail twitching in dreams no one would ever understand. His walks through the cemetery were always the same. Exact, controlled, military clean. The only deviation was his breath, drawn shakier now, clipped with pain. He slept in no one's house, answered no one's call, except one. On the night of November 10th, the air shifted. Not a wind, not quite, but something in it stirred, like the taste of something lost drifting close again. Eli was already in bed when it happened. A knock at the door. 3 slow knocks. His grandmother answered. Then silence. After a pause, she called for him. "Eli, there's someone here for you." He padded down the stairs, half asleep, rubbing his eyes. At the doorway stood a man in army green, polished boots beside worn duffel bags. "You Daniel Rourke's family?" he asked, voice rough with gravel and memory. "I was his spotter. Name's Tuck. We were there when it happened." The air in the room collapsed around them. Eli's grandmother trembled. Her eyes filled not with pain but with something harder to name. Recognition, maybe. Or the deafening return of time. Tuck didn't ask permission. He just sat. Poured himself a glass of lukewarm lemonade from the pitcher. Then he reached into his bag and pulled out a clump of dog tags, rusted slightly at the edges, bleeding the scent of Afghan dust. "I came back because I found something," he said. Then he opened a small velvet pouch. Inside it, a metal badge, scratched, burn-scarred, the last ID tag ever assigned to Gunnar before he left the field. "Figured the old boy had earned it," he said, "but he's got to get it from me in person." And I think he's been looking for him all this time. He didn't mean Daniel, he meant Eli, because Daniel had told Tuck once, right before his final patrol, that if anything happened and he didn't walk back, Gunnar should go home to his nephew, Eli. The boy dropped everything in his hands, and outside, in the silence that pressed like cotton against time, a single familiar bark echoed against the porch steps. Low, gravelly, coming closer. Eli stood frozen in the middle of the living room, the weight of Tuck's words pressing down on him like a hand against his chest. His breath came short, ragged, as if the air itself had turned to sand. Daniel, his uncle, the man he barely remembered except through faded photographs and his grandmother's quiet stories, had wanted Gunnar to come to him. Him, a scrawny 12-year-old who couldn't even throw a baseball straight anymore, not since everything had fallen apart last year. The dog tags on the table glinted under the dim light of the kitchen lamp, their scratched edges catching shadows like old wounds. Eli's hands shook as he stared at them, then at the velvet pouch with Gunnar's badge, a relic of a war he couldn't begin to understand. Outside, that low, gravelly bark lingered in the air, closer now, pulling at something deep inside him. He didn't know what to feel. Guilt clawed at him first. Why hadn't he known? Why hadn't anyone told him? He'd watched Gunnar walk that lonely path to the cemetery every night for months, and he'd done nothing but leave out a bowl of water. He hadn't even touched him, hadn't tried to call him over. What kind of nephew was he if Daniel had trusted him with something so important and he'd just let it slip by? But under the guilt was something sharper, something that stung like a slap. Fear. Fear of what it meant to be the one Gunnar was supposed to find. Fear of failing again like he had with everything else. His parents were gone, lost to a car wreck on a rain-slicked highway last spring, and now he was supposed to carry this. A soldier's dog. A soldier's last wish. "Eli?" His grandmother's voice cut through the haze, soft but trembling. She stood by the doorway, her hands clutching the edge of her faded apron. Her eyes, usually so steady, were glassy with unshed tears. "You okay, honey?" He couldn't answer. His throat felt like it was stuffed with cotton. He just shook his head quick and sharp and turned away, his sneakers scuffing against the worn hardwood floor. Tuck watched him, his weathered face unreadable, but there was a heaviness in his silence, like he knew exactly what was tearing through the boy's mind. "I didn't mean to drop this on you like a grenade," Tuck said after a long pause, his voice low, rough with something that might have been regret. "But I've been carrying this for 3 years. Couldn't keep it no more. Danny, your uncle, he talked about you all the time out there. Said you were the one thing he'd fight to get back to. Said if he didn't make it, Gunnar'd find you. Keep you safe." "Safe." Eli's voice cracked, barely above a whisper, but it carried a raw edge. He spun around, his fists clenched at his sides. "How's a dog supposed to keep me safe? He can barely walk. He's out there every night, just waiting for someone who ain't coming back. And I—" He stopped, his chest heaving, the words catching like thorns. "I don't even know how to take care of myself." Tuck didn't flinch. He just leaned back in the chair, the old wood creaking under his weight, and rubbed a calloused hand over his jaw. "Sometimes it ain't about taking care of yourself first. Sometimes it's about taking care of what's left behind. Gunnar's been marching to that graveyard every night because he don't know how to stop. He's waiting for Danny, or maybe he's waiting for you to tell him it's okay to stop." Eli's knees felt weak. He sank onto the edge of the couch, his hands gripping the frayed cushion until his knuckles turned white. He didn't want to hear this. Didn't want to think about Gunnar's tired eyes, or the way his paws dragged through the dew at Oak Hill Cemetery. Didn't want to picture Daniel, a man he could only remember in fragments, a laugh, a hand ruffling his hair, trusting him with something so heavy. His grandmother moved closer, her hand resting on his shoulder, but he shrugged it off, not because he didn't want her there, but because he didn't know how to let her in right now. "I need air," he muttered, standing abruptly and heading for the door. He didn't wait for them to stop him. The screen door slammed behind him, the sound echoing into the still North Carolina night. The air outside was cool, tinged with the scent of pine and the faint metallic tang of coming rain. He stood on the porch, his breath fogging in front of him, and that's when he saw him, Gunnar, standing at the edge of the yard where the grass met the gravel alley. The old German shepherd's fur was matted with dirt, his grey muzzle catching the faint glow of the streetlight. His eyes, sharp despite the years, locked onto Eli's, and for the first time, the boy felt like the dog was really seeing him, not just passing by, not just waiting for someone else. Eli's heart thudded hard against his ribs. He wanted to turn back inside, to hide from those eyes, but his feet wouldn't move. Gunnar took a slow step forward, then stopped, his head tilting slightly as if asking a question Eli didn't know how to answer. The silence between them stretched, heavy with something unspoken, until Gunnar let out a soft, almost pleading whine. It wasn't loud, wasn't demanding, but it cut through Eli like a blade. He felt his eyes burn, felt the lump in his throat grow until it hurt to swallow. He didn't know how long he stood there, caught in that moment before Tuck's boots scuffed against the porch steps behind him. The older man didn't say anything at first, just stood there, hands in his pockets, staring out at Gunnar with a look that carried too many memories. "You don't have to decide tonight," Tuck finally said, his voice quieter now, almost gentle. "But I'm heading out tomorrow. Got a bus to catch back to Fort Bragg. I'll leave the badge with you. And if you ever want to hear more about Danny, about what he was like out there, you know where to find me." He paused, then added, "He'd be proud of you, kid, even if you don't feel like you're enough right now." Eli didn't respond. He couldn't. His gaze stayed on Gunnar, who had lowered himself to the ground now, resting his head on his paws, still watching. The weight of Tuck's words, of Daniel's unseen presence, pressed harder. Fort Bragg. The name conjured images of soldiers in uniform, of rolling fields, and the distant sound of drills, a place where men like Daniel and Tuck had been shaped, broken, and remade. It was a world Eli couldn't touch, a world he didn't belong to, and yet here he was, tied to it through a dog who wouldn't stop marching. The next morning, Eli woke to the sound of rain tapping against his window. His room was dim, the grey light filtering through the blinds, and for a moment he thought last night had been a dream. But then he saw it. The velvet pouch on his bedside table, next to the rusted dog tags Tuck had left behind. His stomach twisted as he sat up, running a hand through his messy hair. He hadn't slept much, his mind replaying that bark, those eyes, over and over, until the edges of his thoughts frayed. Downstairs, his grandmother was already in the kitchen, the smell of burnt toast lingering in the air. She didn't say much, just slid a plate across the table and sat down with her coffee, her hands wrapped tight around the mug. The silence between them wasn't new. It had been there since the accident, since the day they'd buried his parents and the world had gone quiet. But today, it felt heavier, like it was waiting for one of them to break it. "Eli," she started, her voice cautious, "I know last night was a lot, and I know you're hurting, but I've been thinking, maybe this is what you need. Something to hold on to. Something that ain't just losing." He stared at the toast, untouched, his fingers digging into the edge of the table. "I don't even know him, Grams. Uncle Danny, I was, 9 when he died? I don't remember his voice. I don't remember nothing except the pictures on your shelf. How am I supposed to be what he wanted?" She sighed long and weary, setting her mug down. "You don't gotta be nothing but yourself, honey. Danny didn't pick you 'cause he thought you'd be perfect. He picked you 'cause he loved you. And that dog out there, he don't need perfect neither. He just needs someone to walk with him, even if it's just a little ways." Her words hung there, soft but piercing, and Eli felt the burn in his eyes again. He pushed back from the table, muttering something about needing to check the shed, and escaped outside before she could see him crack. The rain had lightened to a drizzle, the ground slick under his sneakers as he trudged through the backyard. The bowl of water he'd left out for Gunnar was still there, half full, the surface rippling with tiny drops. But Gunnar wasn't. For the first time in months, The dog wasn't waiting by the alley. Panic flickered through Eli, quick and sharp. He scanned the yard, then the street beyond, his pulse picking up. Had Tuck taken him? Had he wandered off somewhere else? He didn't know why it mattered so much, why the thought of Gunnar being gone felt like losing something all over again. But it did. He grabbed his jacket from the porch hook and slipped it on, the damp fabric cold against his skin, and started down the alley toward Route 43. The road was quiet, the hum of distant traffic barely audible over the patter of rain. Eli walked fast, his breath fogging in the chill, his eyes darting between the ditches and the patches of woods that lined the shoulder. He didn't know what he was looking for, Gunnar, or maybe just a sign that he hadn't disappeared completely. The path to Oak Hill Cemetery loomed ahead, the wrought iron gate visible through the mist, and something in his chest tightened. He hadn't been there since his parents' funeral, hadn't wanted to face the rows of stones or the silence that clung to them. But if Gunnar was anywhere, it would be there. He pushed through the gate, the metal creaking under his hand, and stepped onto the wet grass. The cemetery was empty, save for the gravestones standing like sentinels in the grey light. His sneakers squelched as he moved toward the veterans section, the place where Gunnar always stopped, where Daniel Stone stood among others who'd served. The air felt thicker here, heavy with the scent of damp earth and something else. Memory, maybe, or grief that hadn't faded with time. And then he saw him. Gunnar, lying in front of Daniel's gravestone, his fur soaked and plastered to his sides. The old dog didn't move as Eli approached, didn't even lift his head, but his eyes flicked up, tired and knowing. Eli stopped a few feet away, his hands shoved deep in his pockets, the rain dripping off the brim of his cap. The stone in front of Gunnar was simple, white marble worn by weather, the name Daniel Rourke etched deep alongside his rank and dates. Below it, a small bronze plaque marked him as a recipient of the Purple Heart. Eli had never noticed that before, never thought to look. He didn't know what to say, didn't know how to bridge the gap between him and this dog, between him and the uncle he'd lost before he could really know him. But standing there with the rain soaking through his jacket and Gunnar's steady gaze holding him in place, he felt something shift. Not an answer, not yet, but a crack in the wall he'd built around himself since last spring. "I'm sorry," he whispered finally, his voice barely audible over the drizzle. I didn't know he wanted me to be here for you." Gunnar's ears twitched just slightly, and he let out a low huff, almost like a sigh. Eli crouched down, keeping his distance, but close enough to see the faint tremble in the dog's frame, the way his breaths came shallow and uneven. He thought about the badge in his pocket, the one Tuck had left behind, and wondered if Gunnar would even care about it now after all this time. That's when he noticed something tucked against the base of the gravestone, half hidden by a tuft of grass. A small, weathered envelope, yellowed with age and damp from the rain. Eli's fingers hesitated before picking it up, the paper fragile under his touch. It wasn't sealed, just folded over, and when he opened it, a single sheet of lined paper slipped out, the handwriting slanted and hurried, smudged in places but still legible. "Eli," it started, and his heart stopped for a beat. "If you're reading this, I didn't make it back. I'm sorry for that, kid. More sorry than I can say. I wanted to watch you grow up, wanted to be there for the big stuff. But if I'm gone, I need you to do something for me. Take care of Gunnar. He's been my shadow out here, kept me alive more times than I can count. He's stubborn, won't listen to just anyone, but I know he'll trust you. You got a good heart, even if you don't see it yet. Tell him it's okay to rest when he's ready. And don't forget, I'm proud of you. Always. Uncle Danny." Eli's hands shook so hard, the paper nearly slipped from his grip. He read it again, then a third time, each word carving deeper into him, until his vision blurred with tears he couldn't hold back. He pressed the letter against his chest, the damp paper crumpling, and let out a choked sob. Gunnar watched, silent, but his head lifted just enough to nudge closer, his cold nose brushing against Eli's knee. It was the first time the dog had touched him, and the weight of it, small, fleeting, felt like a tether, pulling him back from the edge of something dark. He didn't know how long he sat there, the rain soaking through his jeans, Gunnar's quiet presence beside him. But eventually he heard footsteps, slow and uneven, crunching against the wet gravel path. He looked up to see his grandmother, an umbrella clutched in one hand, her face etched with worry. She didn't say anything at first, just stood there, her eyes moving from Eli to Gunnar to the letter still clutched in his hand. "I thought I'd find you here," she said softly, her voice thick. "I kept that letter in my drawer for years, couldn't bring myself to give it to you after everything, but I put it here last week. Figured if you came, you'd need to hear it from him." Eli's throat burned. "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" She looked away, her gaze settling on Daniel Stone, her lips pressing into a thin line. "I thought I was protecting you, thought you'd had enough hurt for a lifetime. But I see now, I was wrong. You needed to know. Needed to know he loved you that much." The words hung between them, raw and heavy, and Eli felt the last of his defenses crumble. He wiped at his eyes with the back of his sleeve, his breath hitching, and looked down at Gunnar. The dog's eyes were still on him, steady, waiting, and for the first time Eli felt like he understood what Tuck had meant. Gunnar wasn't just marching to a grave every night. He was marching for a purpose, for a promise, and maybe, just maybe, Eli was part of that promise. He reached into his pocket, pulling out the velvet pouch with Gunnar's badge. His fingers fumbled as he opened it, the metal cold against his palm, scratched and scarred from a life Eli couldn't imagine. He held it out, not sure what he was doing, but needing to do something. Gunnar's head tilted, his ears perking slightly, and he let out a soft whine like he recognized it, like it meant something after all. "I don't know if I can be what he wanted," Eli said, his voice breaking, talking to Gunnar now, not his grandmother. "But I'm going to try for him, and for you." Gunnar's tail gave a single slow wag, the first Eli had ever seen, and it felt like a crack of light in the grey. His grandmother stepped closer, her hand resting on his shoulder again, and this time he didn't pull away. The rain kept falling, soft and steady, washing over the gravestones, over the past, over the boy and the dog who'd finally found each other. But it wasn't over. Eli knew that as he tucked the letter into his jacket, as he slipped the badge back into the pouch. Gunnar was still hurting, still limping, and the path ahead wasn't clear. He couldn't keep letting the dog walk alone every night, couldn't keep watching from the sidelines. He had to decide, really decide, what taking care of Gunnar meant. Did it mean bringing him home, even if the dog fought it? Did it mean walking with him to the cemetery until he was ready to stop? Or did it mean something harder, something Eli wasn't sure he could face? He stood, helping Gunnar to his feet, the old dog leaning against him for support. His grandmother watched, her eyes soft but guarded, like she knew the choice wasn't just about a dog. It was about Eli, about whether he could step into the space Daniel had left for him, whether he could carry even a fraction of that weight. "I'm taking him back to the house," Eli said finally, his voice steadier now, though it still trembled at the edges. "Just for tonight, see if he'll stay. If he don't, I'll figure it out." She nodded, a small, sad smile tugging at her lips. "That's a start, honey, that's a start." They walked back together, Eli's hand resting lightly on Gunnar's back, the dog's steps slow but deliberate beside him. The rain hadn't stopped, and the air still carried that metallic tang, that promise of something heavier on the horizon. Eli didn't know if Gunnar would stay, didn't know if he'd wake up to find the dog gone again, slipping through the fence to keep his lonely vigil. But for the first time in months, maybe years, he felt like he had to try. Not just for Daniel, not just for Gunnar, but for himself. And hey, if this story's hitting you as hard as it's hitting me, do me a favor, hit that subscribe button. There's more to come, and trust me, you don't want to miss how this ends. Let's keep walking this path together. As they reached the house, Eli glanced back toward the cemetery, the gate just visible through the mist. He thought about Fort Bragg again, about the soldiers who'd walked roads like Daniel had, about the weight of promises made in the dust and carried home in silence. He thought about the letter, the words, "I'm proud of you," burning into him like a brand. And he thought about tomorrow, about whether he'd have the strength to keep this promise, or if he'd break under it like he'd broken under so much else. But for now he opened the door, coaxing Gunnar inside with a quiet word, and shut out the rain behind them. The night wasn't over, not by a long shot, and neither was the fight. That first night, with the rain still tapping against the windows of the old house on the edge of Route 43, Eli didn't sleep. He couldn't. Not with Gunnar lying on a folded blanket by the foot of his bed, the dog's shallow breaths filling the quiet room with a rhythm that felt both foreign and heavy. The air inside was thick with the scent of damp fur and the lingering metallic tang of the storm outside, a reminder of the world they'd both walked through to get here. Eli sat cross-legged on the mattress, his back against the wall, the velvet pouch with Gunnar's badge clutched in one hand, Daniel's letter folded tight in the other. His eyes burned from crying, from the weight of words he hadn't been ready to read, but now couldn't unread. He kept glancing at Gunnar, half expecting the old German shepherd to get up, to paw at the door and demand to be let out, to return to his endless march to Oak Hill Cemetery. But Gunnar didn't move. He just lay there, his grey muzzle resting on his paws, his eyes half closed but still watching Eli with a quiet intensity that made the boy's chest ache. The decision to bring Gunnar inside had felt right in the moment, under the drizzle and the weight of his grandmother's gaze. But now, in the stillness of the house, doubt crept in like a shadow. What if Gunnar didn't want this? What if Eli was forcing something the dog wasn't ready for, just like he'd forced himself to keep going after his parents were gone, pretending everything was fine when it wasn't? The thought gnawed at him, sharp and cold. He'd seen the way Gunnar's steps faltered on the way back, the way his legs trembled under the weight of his own body, and yet the dog had followed him, leaning into Eli's touch for support. It was trust, maybe, or just exhaustion. But either way, it felt like a burden Eli wasn't sure he could carry. What if he failed again? What if he let Gunnar down, let Daniel down the way he felt he'd let everyone else down since that rainy night on the highway when his world had shattered? He slid off the bed, careful not to make a sound, and knelt beside Gunnar. The dog's ears twitched, but he didn't lift his head, just let out a low huff, like he knew Eli needed this moment more than he did. Up close, Eli could see the scars on Gunnar's flank, faint lines hidden under matted fur, and the way his ribs pressed too sharply against his skin. He reached out, hesitating, then let his hand rest lightly on the dog's side, feeling the slow rise and fall of each breath. "I don't know how to do this," he whispered, his voice cracking in the dark. "I don't know how to be what he wanted. But I'm scared if I don't try. You'll keep walking out there till you can't anymore. And I can't let that happen." Gunnar's eyes opened fully then, sharp and clear despite the years, and for a heartbeat, Eli felt like the dog understood every word, every jagged edge of his fear. The silence stretched between them, heavy with the ghosts of Kandahar and North Carolina, of explosions and quiet graves, until Eli's throat tightened so much he had to look away. He didn't know if he was strong enough for this, didn't know if he could be the person Daniel had seen in him, but the thought of Gunnar slipping through the fence again, limping alone in the dark to a gravestone that couldn't answer, was worse than any fear of failing. He had to try. He had to. The next morning broke grey and cold, the kind of November dawn that clung to the skin like damp cotton. Eli's grandmother was already up, the kitchen smelling of weak coffee and the faint char of overdone toast. She didn't say much when Eli came down, just nodded toward the back door where Gunnar was sitting, staring out at the yard with his ears pricked, like he could hear something no one else could. "He didn't try to leave in the night," she said, her voice soft but carrying a weight of its own. "I checked, but he's restless. You can see it." Eli nodded, his stomach twisting as he grabbed his jacket from the hook. He'd made up his mind sometime between the third and fourth hour of staring at the ceiling he wasn't going to let Gunnar go back to the cemetery alone. Not today, maybe not ever. But the thought of walking that path with him, of standing by Daniel's grave again with the letter's words still burning in his mind, made his hands shake as he zipped up. "I'm taking him out," he said, not meeting her eyes. Just to see what he does. If he wants to go there, I'll go with him." She didn't argue, just handed him a thermos of hot chocolate she'd poured without asking, her fingers lingering on his for a moment longer than necessary. "Be careful, honey. Both of you." Her voice trembled at the edges, and Eli knew she wasn't just talking about the cold or the slick grass. She was talking about the weight of memory, the way it could pull you under if you weren't ready to face it. He nodded again, quick and sharp, and stepped outside with Gunnar at his side. The air bit at his cheeks as they walked, the dog's pace slow but deliberate, his head low and tail stiff. Eli kept a hand near Gunnar's collar, not holding on, but close enough to steady him if he stumbled. They didn't head straight for Route 43, not at first. Gunnar paused at the edge of the alley, sniffing the damp ground where Eli had left water bowls for months, then turned toward the shed where he'd sometimes slept in the shadow of warped boards. It was like he was retracing steps, mapping a history Eli hadn't been part of until now, and the boy felt the tension coil tighter in his chest with every passing minute. What if Gunnar bolted for the cemetery? What if he refused to come back? What if this was all a mistake and Eli was just dragging out the inevitable? They reached the corner by the blinking streetlight, the one Gunnar always stopped at, and the dog froze, his body going rigid. Eli's heart thudded hard as he crouched beside him, following his gaze down the empty road toward Oak Hill. The mist hung low over the asphalt, curling like smoke, and for a moment Eli swore he could feel it, the weight of Daniel's absence, the silence of a war he'd never seen but carried anyway. Gunnar let out a low whine, not pleading this time, but sharp, almost pained, and Eli's throat closed up. "Hey," he said, his voice rough, barely above a whisper. "You don't got to go if you don't want to. I'm here. I'm not going anywhere. But if you need to, I'll walk with you. Every step." Gunnar turned his head, his eyes locking onto Eli's, and something passed between them, something raw and unspoken. The dog's whine faded, replaced by a shaky huff, and he took a single step forward, then stopped, waiting. Eli's breath caught. It wasn't just a walk, it was a choice, a question, and he knew right then that this was it, the moment he couldn't turn back from, the moment he had to answer for Daniel, for Gunnar, for himself. He stood, his legs unsteady, and nodded. "Okay, let's go." They walked together down Route 43, the gravel crunching under Eli's sneakers, Gunnar's paws dragging slightly with each step. The cemetery gate loomed ahead, rusted iron against the grey sky, and Eli's pulse hammered in his ears as they passed through. The grass was still wet from last night's rain, soaking through his jeans as he knelt beside Daniel's stone once they reached it, Gunnar settling heavily at his side. The boy's fingers dug into the earth, cold and unyielding, as he stared at the etched name, the Purple Heart plaque glinting dully in the weak light. The letter was still in his jacket pocket, creased and damp, and he pulled it out, unfolding it with hands that wouldn't stop trembling. "I read it again last night," he said, not sure if he was talking to Gunnar or the stone or the air itself. "What you wrote. About me having a good heart. I don't know if that's true, Uncle Danny. I've been so mad, so messed up since Mom and Dad, since they didn't come home. I didn't think I had anything good left. But you thought I did. You thought I could do this." His voice broke, and he pressed the heel of his hand against his eyes, trying to hold back the tears that kept coming anyway. "I'm sorry I didn't know sooner. I'm sorry I let him walk alone all this time. I'm gonna try harder. I swear I am." Gunnar nudged closer, his cold nose pressing against Eli's arm, and the boy let out a shaky sob, wrapping one arm around the dog's neck, burying his face in the damp fur. It was the first time he'd held him, really held him, and the weight of it, the warmth, the trembling, the years of pain they both carried, cracked something open inside him. "It's okay," he whispered, the words spilling out raw and desperate. "You don't gotta keep marching for him. You did enough. You did more than enough. We can rest now, both of us." The dog let out a long, shuddering breath, like he'd been waiting to hear those words for years, and his body seemed to sag, not with defeat, but with something softer, something like relief. Eli held on tighter, the tears soaking into Gunnar's fur, and for the first time since he could remember, he didn't feel so alone. The cemetery was silent around them, the mist curling over the gravestones like a shroud, but in that silence there was a kind of peace, a kind of forgiveness, not just for Gunnar, but for Eli too, for the boy who'd lost everything and thought he'd never find a way back, for the dog who'd carried a soldier's last wish across miles and years and endless nights. Days turned into weeks after that morning, and Eli changed in ways he didn't notice at first, ways his grandmother saw before he did. He didn't watch Gunnar from behind the blinds anymore, didn't wait for the dog to slip through the fence and disappear into the dark. Instead, he built a proper bed for him in the corner of the living room, using old blankets and a pillow from his own room, and every night he sat there with him, sometimes talking, sometimes just sitting, his hand resting on Gunner's side as the dog's breathing slowed into sleep. He started walking him too, not to the cemetery every time, but around the block, down to the creek where the water ran clear over smooth stones, letting Gunner set the pace, even when it meant stopping every few steps to rest. The locals noticed, old men tipping their hats from porches, kids on bikes slowing to stare, and they started calling Eli the soldier's boy, not with pity, but with something like respect. But it wasn't all easy. Gunner's health wasn't getting better, and Eli knew it even if he didn't want to say it out loud. The vet in town, a gruff man with hands scarred from years of handling animals, looked over Gunner one afternoon and shook his head, his voice low as he told Eli the truth. Arthritis, old injuries, a heart that was wearing out faster than it should. "He's a fighter," the vet said, adjusting his glasses. "But he's tired, kid. You're doing right by him, giving him a place to be. Just don't expect miracles." Eli nodded, his jaw tight, and paid for the visit with money he'd saved from odd jobs, mowing lawns and raking leaves for neighbors. That night he sat on the porch with Gunner, the air crisp with the first hint of winter, and made a decision he hadn't wanted to face. He couldn't keep pushing Gunner to hold on, not when every step hurt, not when the dog's eyes carried a quiet plea for rest. It was a sacrifice, letting go of the one thing that had tethered him to Daniel, to a purpose he'd only just started to understand. But it was the right thing, the only thing, and Eli knew it even as it tore at him. He'd promised to take care of Gunner, and sometimes taking care meant knowing when to stop fighting. "I'm not going to let you hurt anymore," he murmured, scratching behind Gunner's ears, the dog's head resting heavy in his lap. "You did your job. You found me. Now it's my turn to do right by you." Gunner's tail gave a slow, weak wag, and Eli smiled through the tears, the first real smile he'd felt in months. When the time came, a few days later, Eli didn't do it alone. His grandmother drove them to the vet, her hands steady on the wheel even as her eyes shone with unshed grief. The room was quiet, sterile, the kind of place that felt too cold for goodbyes, but Eli held Gunner close, whispering to him as the injection took effect, as the dog's body finally stilled. "Thank you," he said, over and over, until the words blurred into nothing. "Thank you for waiting for me." Afterward, they didn't bury Gunner in the backyard or some empty field. Eli knew where he belonged. With his grandmother's help, he carried the small box of ashes to Oak Hill Cemetery, to the spot beside Daniel's stone where Gunner had stood watch for so long. The ground was hard with frost, but Eli dug with his hands until there was space enough, his fingers numb and caked with dirt. He placed the box gently, then pulled out the velvet pouch from his pocket, the one with Gunner's scarred badge. He didn't keep it, didn't take it home to sit on a shelf. Instead, he laid it on top of the box, a final honor. A soldier's medal returned to where it belonged. The wind picked up as he stood, carrying the faint scent of pine and earth, and Eli looked out over the rows of gravestones, the quiet town beyond, the life he was still learning to live. His grandmother rested a hand on his shoulder, silent but there, and he didn't pull away this time. In the fading light of the day, with the badge glinting one last time before he covered it with soil, Eli felt the weight of loss, but also the weight of something new. Hope, maybe, or the promise of healing. Gunner had marched his last mile, and in doing so, had shown Eli how to keep going, even when the road felt too long, too dark. Time moves on, doesn't it? It doesn't wait for us to be ready, doesn't stop to let us catch our breath. War leaves its marks, on soldiers, on dogs, on boys who never asked to carry the pieces left behind. But in the silence after the gunfire, in the quiet after the graves are dug, there's a chance to rebuild, to find a way to laugh again, to remember without breaking. Healing isn't loud. It's in the small steps, the slow wags of a tail, the choice to show up even when you're scared. And maybe, just maybe, it's in knowing that love, real, stubborn, battle-scarred love, never really leaves, even when the ones who gave it are gone. If this story's touched something in you, if it's made you feel the ache and the hope all at once, I'd love to hear it. Comment, "I believe in healing" below, and share this with someone who might need to know they're not walking alone. Hit that subscribe button too. We've got more stories to tell, more paths to walk together. Let's keep going one step at a time.